So glad that you guys are here to talk about the 990. All right, so what we're going to cover today is kind of talking about special events, the purpose and why we are tracking special events for the 990, what special events are, talk about special event revenue, fair market value versus a contribution, in-kind auctions, gaming, as well as going over different special event expenses, how to ensure that you are accurately filing your 990 when it comes to special events, and what support Kansas City needs from you in order to ensure that accurate filing. And then we'll have questions at the end. Okay, so we will just kind of jump into it. So special events are kind of a big part of the 990. If you've had a special event and SKC has filed your 990, you know that that's kind of a lot of the questions back and forth with your preparer are kind of focused around. And so the purpose of it is to offer transparency so the IRS can see and anyone who's looking at your 990 about how effective the organization is at raising funds when it comes to your special event. So are you just throwing an expensive party for your friends and family and calling it a special event? Or is the purpose to effectively raise funds for the organization? And one thing to note is, and we'll point out when we look at an example on the 990, is it might look like at face value that the organization lost money on the special event, but that's typically because we report special event contributions up on a separate line. And so we'll make sure to point that out when we get to that part. All right, so what is a special event? So the IRS doesn't have a single definition for a special event, but kind of a good general one is an activity that's conducted for the purpose of raising funds, and such as galas, dinners, auctions, golf tournaments, etc. So there's two components: revenue generation, so tickets and sponsorships are good examples, and then the people who are attending are getting a good or service like a meal, entertainment, things like that. So when you are looking at, did we have a special event? It's good to see what was the purpose of the event. Was it to raise funds, or were you having a program event where the goal was a program function and maybe some people donated while they were there? So for example, we have a client at Support Kansas City that they run a 5K, but we do not consider it a special event because it is related to their programming. And so we call it a program event because the people who are attending are a part of the program who are then running. But for most other clients, if you do have a 5K, it's typically a fundraising event. People are participating to raise funds for your organization. So kind of the most common revenue that we see when it comes to special events, and we'll kind of dive into these categories a little bit deeper, are tickets, entry fees for like golf tournaments or 5Ks, sponsorships, auctions, raffles, wine pools, and just general donations, cash or in kind. So when it comes to special event revenue, there are kind of two different areas. So we've got special event income. So this is money that the organization receives where the donor receives something of value in return. And we call that a fair market value. So if I buy a ticket to a gala for $100, I'm getting something in return. I'm getting dinner and food and drinks and entertainment. Or if I buy a silent auction item, I'm getting something in return when I win, or a raffle ticket. I'm going to get something potentially in return. And then there are just general contributions where the donor doesn't respect or expect anything in return. So they're just giving out of the goodness of their heart and just wanting to further your guys' mission instead of expecting that they're going to get a t-shirt or food or drink. So when it comes to special event income, we need to break out what had a fair market value associated with it and what portion was a contribution. So for example, if we had a $100 ticket to a gala, the value that the person's receiving, you can calculate this on your own, but this is just for an example. The value that we're going to say of the food and drink and entertainment was $25. So if I were to go out and have a similar experience on my own, we would call that a $25 value. Meaning that my $100 ticket purchase, I paid above the fair market value of the dinner and the food and drink. So there was a $75 contribution for that event ticket. Same thing we could do with entry fees. So for example, if you're throwing a golf tournament and a entry for that is $125, if I were to go out and play a similar round of golf and have a similar boxed meal or whatever you're providing, then the contribution portion for that person buying that ticket would be $65. And then with sponsorships, we can calculate the fair market value by looking at, okay, we'll pretend it's the same gala as the tickets with a $25 fair market value. So you could say, okay, for $1,000 sponsorship, they get 10 tickets to the event. So of those 10 tickets, it would be a $25 fair market value times 10 is $250 to then get the contribution portion. A lot of times for your sponsors, you're also acknowledging them at the event. Their name may be printed on different advertisements and things like that. The IRS says as long as it's not significant advertising, to go ahead and treat that as a contribution. So we're really only looking at kind of that ticket, like how many tickets they get, kind of to calculate that fair market value. And then auctions, we will talk about a little bit later on what Support Kansas City needs. But there are a bunch of different ways that auction items can work out. You can sell above fair market value, below fair market value, right at fair market value on those items. So knowing the fair market value of your tickets and sponsors and things like that is very important because on part 5 of the 990, there's a question. Did the organization receive payments in excess of $75, partly made as a contribution and partly for goods or services? So if you have a special event and anything related to that special event is above $75, you're going to answer yes to that question because people are contributing for a good and service and making a contribution to your organization. So if you answer yes to 7A, then you are required to answer 7B, which is, did your organization notify the donor of the value of those goods or services provided? So we want you to be able to answer yes to that question. There's a different ways that you can go about it, but making sure that like in your thank you note or in your marketing for the event that you provide that information. So like an example, this is from one of our clients that has a golf event. On their information sheets that go out, they have, okay, to be a title sponsor, it's $10,000, and the tax deductible portion is listed for all of their sponsors. So, and that's a great way to do it. You can also do it in your thank you notes, but making sure that you're providing that information so you can answer yes to that 7B question. All right, so Another form of revenue at special events are just straight contributions. So these are contributions out of the goodness of people's hearts, where they are not expecting anything in return. So if someone is like, hey, I would like to attend, but I'm going to be out of town, here's $100, they're not going to receive any of those goods or services from your special event. And so that's considered a straight contribution. Donations during the event, fund the need, paddle raises, and then in-kind goods, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. But there is no fair market being received kind of on this. All right, in-kind goods. So I think just with all the clients that we work with, this is kind of a piece that's missing from a lot of our clients. That's really important that we record, is that if you had in-kind auction items, people from the public donated things for you to auction off for your event, or if someone provided catering for free or for a discount, or decor or other items for the special event, it's important that we record that in QuickBooks and on the 990 to show we may not have received cash, but we do have a wide variety of donors who are willing to give us non-cash items as well. And it will increase the contributions that are shown on your special event. And it's helpful to know, like, hey, if we didn't have such a wide variety of donors who are willing to give us auction items and things like that, we would have to pay for those out of pocket. And so it's helpful for planning purposes as well. Another form of in-kind is in-kind services. Those are not reportable on the 990, but I think it's also helpful to track those in QuickBooks and get those recorded for the same reasons of planning for the future and saying, okay, we had our band, they gave us a 25% discount on the entertainment that they're providing. And so because of that relationship we have with them, if we had to find a different band or a different form of entertainment, then we would have to pay an extra 25% to kind of have that same level. So that's something that's useful to put in QuickBooks, but it will not affect your 990. But I think it's still helpful as an organization to make sure you're doing that. All right, so when it comes to in-kind or auction items, in order to determine what the contribution portion was on that revenue, we need the following. So we need a list of all your auction items, a note if they were purchased or donated from somebody, the value of the auction, and then the price that the item sold for. So then we can go in and say, okay, the value of it was $100. It sold for $150. There was a $50 contribution. Or the value was $100. It sold for $90. There is no contribution from the person who won that auction item. One other thing that we see commonly with auction items is people will say priceless, which is great, but the IRS doesn't accept that as an answer. And so it's helpful to, as best as your ability, to come up with a value for that item. If you're not sure what it is, you can wait till the end of the event. And if you have a Patrick Mahomes signed jersey and it's sold for $500, you can just say that the value is $500 on that item or whatever it's sold for. All right. The next revenue that we see a lot is gaming. So this is the IRS example of gaming. I haven't even heard of a lot of these, but for the most part, we see raffles and then other games of chance, kind of like wine pools and things like that for our clients. For gaming, there is no contribution portion for any of the funds that you receive from the gaming. So if I buy a raffle ticket for $25, there is no contribution portion because I could win even if there's 20 other people also entering that raffle. So there is no contribution portion. And so that's why we need to make sure that that is broken out separately from other revenue and it gets put on a separate line on the 990, any gaming revenue. So your SKC preparer will need the following. So we'll need the total brought in from the raffle, what was raffled off versus what was donated or purchased, the value of the raffle items, and then a price for the single raffle ticket. And then same thing with like a wine pull. That's kind of the other example of a gaming because you have the chance to get a bottle of wine valued at X number of dollars. But we need the total income received from the wine pull, the value of what was donated, or value of the wine, and then what was donated and purchased, the price to do one single wine pull, and then the value of the highest bottle of wine or whatever's being pulled. I would say the vast majority of our clients do not have gaming revenue above $15,000. But if you do, there's some additional questions on Schedule G of the 990. At that point, the 990 preparer is going to reach out to you and ask you these questions and things like that. But if you're planning on having a significant amount of gaming revenue, this is something to kind of think about as you're preparing for your event and questions that you're going to have to answer later on. So we need to know the state in which the gaming's conducted. Did you have a gaming license? The percentage of gaming conducted in your facility or outside your facility. The person who is keeping the records of the gaming and special event. Are you contracted with a third party who's then going to receive the gaming revenue? And then if you have a gaming manager, we'll need, if it's a contractor or an employee, kind of information on their compensation and description of the services that they're providing. So when it comes to gaming licenses, in Missouri, a license is not required if revenue is under $5,000. And in Kansas, that limit is $25,000. Another thing to think about when having a raffle or any other type of gaming is a W-2G needed to be issued for anyone who wins the prize or cash or whatever was being raffled off. So a W-2G will need to be issued if the winnings from the event are either in cash or the fair market value of whatever was won is above $600 and the 300 times the amount of the wager. So that means whatever like the raffle ticket cost times 300, if that is less than the value, then a W-2G is needed to be issued. So for example, if you are raffling off a piece of jewelry valued at $1,000, a single ticket to enter that raffle is $3. You would need a W-2G because 3 times 300 is 900 and the value is greater than that $900. If the value of the raffle ticket or of the jewelry was $1,500, then you would not need to issue a W-2G. Another example would be a 50-50 raffle. So if the winner received $700 and a single ticket was $1, a W-2G would need to be issued. But if the winner only won $500, because it's under that $600 threshold, a W-2G would not be needed. But Best practice is, if you're not quite sure if a W-2G is going to be needed, to go ahead and get a signed W-9 form from the winner before you give them their prize. This will give Support Kansas City everything we need to issue the W-2G, so their name, address, and social security number. And then even if the proceeds, so if it's a 50-50 raffle winner and they receive that $700 in cash and they're like, go ahead and keep it, I want to donate it back to the organization, you still need to issue a W-2G, and kind of that correction of winning versus donating it back will go on their personal taxes. So you'll issue the W-2G, they'll receive that to show the income they received, but then they'll also have the thank you note from your organization saying, hey, thank you for your $700 contribution. But you still need to issue that W-2G. And then at the end of the year, Support Kansas City will go ahead and issue those 10 W-2Gs along with our 1099s that we do in January. So make sure that you provide that information to your SKC contact, so we can make sure that that gets issued in January. So this is an example of where we are reporting the special event income on the revenue section of the 990, and we're also reporting it on Schedule G, which we'll see here in a minute. So up at the top on line 1C, this is where your total contributions from the special event gets reported. 1G, if there were in kind, this client didn't have in kind, that's where you would report if there were in kind raffle items or food or anything like that, that would get reported on line 1G. And then down below, line 1A is kind of how we get that gross income or the kind of the fair market value of the event. And then line 8B are those special event expenses, and then it gets netted in that first column. So as you can see, this client has a negative $42,000 for the event. However, it does not take into account what's reported on line 1C as their contributions. So if you go ahead and net the fundraising event minus the $42,000, you can see that the event didn't lose money. They actually received a substantial amount of contributions for that event. So this is kind of on page 9 of your full 990. If you complete an easy, it'll be a similar breakout, just a little bit simpler. And then if special event income is $15,000 or more, then you complete Schedule G, which is the exact same numbers from the revenue, just a little bit more detail, especially on the expense side of things. So you can see the gross receipts, contributions, kind of that fair market value calculation, and how the expenses were broken out, which we'll talk about here, expenses here in a minute. Oh, also, if you do have more than one special event, it will be broken out into multiple columns. So if you have a luncheon and a 5K and 2 other events, they will fall into these columns. So it's important that either those events are being broken out on your chart of accounts or using classes to make sure we're accounting for each event accurately. And then for gaming, on the revenue section, we have our gross income from gaming. You can see we don't have any contribution portion, and then the direct expenses. And then on part G, because this one was a bit of $15,000, we're providing additional detail on kind of the breakout between cash prizes and non-cash prizes. All right, so the revenue section is the most difficult part of the 990 and kind of finding that fair market value versus contribution. Expenses are a lot simpler. And so this part should go pretty quick. All right. So when we are working on special event expenses, we're only looking at expenses that are directly attributed to that special event. So if you had an insurance policy that your venue required you to take out for that event, that's a direct expense for the event. But if you have your insurance policy that covers the whole organization, not just in general, we can't allocate those expenses to your special event because it's not a direct expense. So these are the 6 categories that the IRS has on Schedule G. So at a minimum, your chart of accounts should have these categories in QuickBooks for you to be able to select, okay, that was a cash prize, that was a non-cash prize, or that was food or beverage. But feel free to expand your chart of accounts to include more categories, especially if like this other direct expenses, you want to see more detail, or for entertainment, you want to see more detail, or for food or beverage, you want food, beverage, alcohol, things like that. Feel free to expand those, but at a minimum, you should have these categories on your chart of accounts and allocating expenses here. And kind of the main question I think I ask a lot when it comes to special event expenses is to see an invoice for the final invoice, typically for the venue. So a lot of times our clients the venue is a venue, but they're also providing like food and beverage and things like that. And so looking at that final invoice to show, okay, you paid $10,000 for the venue, $10,000 for food and beverage, $6,000 for other direct expenses, to make sure that we are not putting it all into facility cost when you are also paying for food and beverage and other expenses. All right, so how can you ensure an accurate filing of your 990? I think the biggest one on the income side of things is to use an event tracking software. And then with that event software, making sure to tie that information to QuickBooks. So if you're using a sync function, like with your database or something that you run some test transactions ahead of the event, so like the day of, all those transactions sync accurately. And then to reconcile between QuickBooks and the software after the event. I know a lot of times when I ask questions, when it relates to the 990, clients will say, oh, we had $20,000 in sponsorships. And I look in QuickBooks and it only has 5. So making sure that you're reconciling the difference between those two to make sure what's in QuickBooks is accurate. Sometimes in the event software, someone's like, oh, XYZ organization, they said they were going to be a sponsor, so we went ahead and entered it in, but that check never came. And so making sure that that reconciliation is happening, so that's kind of taken off that special event software. And then making sure to keep invoices, especially when it comes to the venue. Okay, so what does Support Kansas City need specifically from you when you have a special event? I think kind of making sure that these are in the forefront of your mind as the event is happening, or directly after it, because it's a lot easier to answer these questions now than it is a year later when we're working on the 990. Also, these questions are regardless if you are filing a 990 EZ or a full 990. If you're having a special event, if it's a $5,000 special event or a $100,000 special event, these questions are the same no matter what. It just, some things may not be applicable. So like I said, making sure accurate entry into QuickBooks, and your income categories, tickets, entry fees, sponsorships, auctions, raffle, other gaming, donations, making sure that that reconciles to your special event software, and that breakdown on your profit and loss is accurate. Making sure you provide detail of in-kind goods that are donated. So if that's your raffle, auction, or other miscellaneous in-kind donations, making sure you provide that to your SKC contact so we can get a full and accurate picture of the special event and those contributions. And then a breakdown of the fair market value of your sponsorships, all your different sponsorship levels, and then any tickets or entry fees as well. And then when it comes to auctions, we will need a report of all the auction items, the value, and the price they sold for. Usually, if you are using a special event software, this is just a quick, easy report that you can pull. You may just need to make note of which items were purchased versus which ones were donated. And then similarly, we've got raffles. So the income brought in from the raffle, the value of the raffle items, what was donated and purchased, and then what was the price of that single raffle ticket, so we can calculate if a W-2G should have been issued. And then other gaming, so wine pool is kind of the next one, but if you have other gaming, we'll need information on that as well, similar to a raffle. And then expenses, making sure that when you run your profit and loss, that the expenses are accurately allocated across those 6 categories that we looked at earlier. And then access to invoices that SKC may request as needed.